the first time. And I mean, it's just that idea that that's the kind of message that women relate to, as opposed to the fact that, you know, they got to make house payments. They're looking for how to provide for their family. They're concerned about national security. You know what? I think women are, this is, I think, demeaning to women to kind of imply that they can't process issues like what happened in Benghazi, the fact that we have an administration that has less safe at home and abroad, and they want to focus only on their, again, quoting from the campaign, their lady parts. I mean, this is absolutely troubling, because I think we've reached a new low.
It's backfired on them. And Romney has closed that gap. This is coming down to an election day turnout effort. And one of the things that I am most pleased with, because FRC and American Family Radio have both been engaged in this, and that is that we have experienced on the ground here in Ohio, neighbor to neighbor, church member to church member, family member to family member, ground game campaigning. The Obama team, they've bussed in, flown in, trained in a lot of union organizers from out of state. They've, shipped hundreds of college-age kids in who I guess are taking a sabbatical from their college studies elsewhere to work neighborhoods and communities that they're not familiar with. I know from experience that the neighbor-to-neighbor, church member-to-church member campaigning and those sorts of efforts actually pay off big time on Election Day.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, as I roll out of Missouri here on Saturday, I'll be up in Ohio. The Values Bus, another bus that FRC has actually been running across the country for the last 14 months, we'll be making one of our final stops outside of Dayton, Ohio, in Vandalia, at the Living Word Church. I'll be preaching there Sunday morning, so if you're hearing us within earshot of Living Word Church, join us Sunday morning as we're doing one last push through the all-important state of Ohio. Ken, as former Secretary of State who had, you were the elections officer there in the state of Ohio, a lot of activity in early voting. I voted because I was going to be on the road through the election. I voted early this week back in my now home state of Louisiana. Stood in line for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I have never stood in a line that long. Actually, I guess I haven't stood, let me rephrase that. I haven't stood in a line that long since I left boot camp as a Marine. I'm not very patient, but I knew how important this election was, and obviously others do as well. What are you seeing in terms of the pre-election turnout, and what does that tell us about this election?
Well, look, two different strategies are being played out here in Ohio. The Obama campaign is cannibalizing its election day turnout. Historically, they've had a pretty good 72-hour program, meaning the last 72 hours leading up to the campaign, they have a good push effort going. They saw the president starting to bleed support when people were starting to have serious questions about not only his energy but his commitment and his leadership, and so they've pushed a lot of in-person early voters to the polls. The Republicans took a different approach in Ohio, and I would imagine it might be the case in other states, where the Republicans have had a good disciplined vote on Election Day. They went for what we call low-intensity voters, folks who have maybe voted one time in the last 4 elections. They concentrated their efforts to get those folks out early or to vote absentee and depend on their disciplined voters on Election Day. But what we've experienced, comparing the intensity, is that while they have a good number, meaning the Team Obama, of in-person early voting, they are way off of their mark in terms of Democrats who had voted early in 2008. So we think that in Ohio, Republicans will probably win the day when it comes to the combination of absentee by mail voting and in-person same-day voting. So it's going to be a battle. This is what it's come down to. I like what you always say. You know, the truth is it always does come down to a get-out-the-vote effort.
That's right.
And affecting the composition of who comes out on election day. But I'll tell you, the Benghazi issue has had a tremendous impact on the electorate in Ohio. And it's not that everybody understands the ins and outs, but they understand that this president turned his back on folks who were on the front lines, both diplomats and security officers. And that doesn't sit well with voter groups across the board. As a matter of fact, the only group that's a challenge group for us now, I call them the MTV crowd, that's 18 to 29-year-olds. We're still working very hard on that demographic group. All other demographic groups, there's been tremendous movement for the pro-life, pro-marriage, pro-free market candidate Mitt Romney.
So I guess you'll be on MTV soon. But you're listening to the Washington Watch edition of Today's Issues. I'm Tony Perkins. Tim Wildman is out today. In fact, he's in Memphis speaking to the Coalition of African American Pastors about the important issues in this election cycle. And I'm joined now by my good friend Ken Blackwell. He is Senior Fellow at FRC for Family Empowerment. He also former Secretary of State of Ohio, gubernatorial candidate, Republican candidate from the state of Ohio, ambassador to the United Nations. He has just done it all in his lifetime. Ken, back in my home state of Louisiana, although we've turned a corner, this is not the case anymore. But corruption, especially when it came to voting, is not something that is foreign to us. In fact, we used to have a motto: "Vote early and often." This early voting and this activity we're seeing, is there reason to be concerned about voter fraud in this election?
Well, Tony, there's no perfect and totally foolproof system, because in the final analysis, these are still human systems. But in Ohio, and again, let me stay focused there, they have a pretty good history of what I call a double-locked system, where these ballots are under the watchful eye of two sets of eyeballs, a Democrat set and a Republican set, and there really just hasn't been any shenanigans there. Let me tell you, though, there is a new experience in Ohio. Our Secretary of State mailed out to each voter a absentee ballot request form. They now have 800,000 absentee ballots out that haven't been returned. So that means that if somebody says, well, you know what, I wanted an absentee ballot, but I changed my mind, I'm going to vote the old-fashioned way on Election Day, when they go to their polling place, the records will show that they got an absentee ballot, and they will not be allowed to vote the normal ballot. They will have to vote a provisional ballot, and those ballots won't be counted until November the 17th, when they can verify that they didn't vote twice. So I'm concerned that we have a new experience and a new group of votes that we're going to have to keep track of to make sure that nobody votes twice and the system is not gamed. So
all right,
that's
Ken,
where we are. Vigilance, and nothing can beat folks being there to watch the process.
All right, Ken Blackwell, thanks so much for joining us. After the break, we'll be back. We'll be back after the break with Councilman Fernando Cabrera. Don't go away. We'll be back with more in just a moment.
On the next Today's Issues,
fire away. Kirby Anderson of Point of View joins us again, taking your calls about whatever is on your mind. The election won't even be mentioned, right? We won't hear anything about the economy or the war on marriage. Right. You provide the topics and we'll try to keep up on Fire Away.
Today's Issues, every weekday morning at 11:05 Eastern, 10:05 Central on AFR and online at afr.net.
Now for the Friends of Israel, here's David Dolan with an eye on the Middle East.
The large Jerusalem neighborhood of Gilo is located on a hill that bears the same name. With some 40,000 people residing in it, Gilo lies due south of the heart of Israel's contested capital city, not far from the Palestinian town of Bethlehem. During the first and second Palestinian uprisings, Gilo was the recipient of frequent Palestinian shell and rifle fire, mostly attributed to the radical Hamas movement and its Muslim fundamentalist allies. Despite its close proximity to Palestinian Authority-controlled land, many Israeli Jews look for apartments to rent or buy in the Gilo neighborhood, since prices tend to be cheaper than in most other parts of the Holy City. To meet the growing housing demand, the Jerusalem municipality recently announced that nearly 800 new apartment units will soon be constructed on the western slopes of Mount Gilo, not far from the Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum and the Jerusalem Football Stadium. The European Union labeled the planned construction project as an obstacle to peace. Jerusalem Mayor Nir Barkat responded that Gilo, quote, is and will remain an inseparable part of Jerusalem.
Over the years, the Friends of Israel has produced several important videos that will help you better understand Scripture and the biblical basis for supporting Israel. A brief description of each DVD title in the Friends of Israel Video Classics series can be found at foi.org/classics. The Friends of Israel Video Classics DVDs can be purchased in our web store. Just visit foi.org/classics. Once again, that's foi.org/classics.
News, pop culture, and the quirkier side of life. The Todd Starnes Commentary.
People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals want the city of Irvine, California to erect a memorial to honor a bunch of dead fish. Seems about 1,200 pounds of saltwater bass met an unfortunate demise when their container truck was involved in a car crash. Most of the fish died on impact, but some were seen flopping on the pavement. PETA now demanding a roadside memorial sign. They say the fish are intelligent creatures who can tell time, count, and enjoy singing. On a personal note, I got a big-mouth billy bass for Christmas a few years back. It really can carry a tune. Docile tones aside, the city of Irvine, California says the chances for a memorial are slim. Back home in Mississippi, we always honor dead fish, normally by covering them in cornmeal, tossing them in peanut oil, and serving them with the side of tartar sauce and hush puppies. I'm Todd Starnes.
You're listening to Today's Issues with Tim Wildman and Tony Perkins. Email your comments to comments@afr.net. Past broadcasts of Today's Issues are available for listening and viewing in the archive at afr.net. Now, back to more of Today's Issues.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Tony Perkins, Tim Wildman.